A staggering 70 of murder confessions obtained by police are later recanted. Yet the labyrinthine dance between truth and deception often hinges on a single, inexplicable statement. It was a frigid Tuesday evening when the call came in, the kind that slices through the mundane hum of a police station, bringing with it the acrid scent of a life violently extinguished. Constable Ramesh, still new enough to the night shift to feel a prickle of unease at every siren, scribbled down the initial details. An abandoned warehouse on the city's forgotten industrial fringe, a discovery made by a curious teenager chasing a stray dog. The coordinates pointed to a place known more for its rusting hulks and broken windows than for the grim theater of a crime scene. When Inspector Sharma arrived, his breath pluming in the crisp air, the scene was already a tableau of flashing blue and red lights against the inky blackness. The warehouse, a sprawling monument to defunct industry, loomed silently, its corrugated metal walls echoing the silent scream of the crime within. Inside, the victim lay slumped against a stack of discarded wooden pallets, a macabre still life bathed in the stark beam of a forensic flashlight. It was a man, identifiable by the wallet in his pocket as Deepak Mehra, a mid-level manager at a local textile mill. The cause of death was immediately apparent. A single, brutal stab wound to the chest, deep and precise, suggesting an attacker driven by intent, not just impulse. The forensics team moved with the methodical efficiency of trained professionals, each movement a careful step in the dance of evidence collection. Fingerprints were dusted, samples taken, the perimeter painstakingly scoured for anything that might whisper a clue. Sharma, a veteran of 2 decades on the force, watched impassively. He had seen countless bodies, each telling its own silent story, but the emptiness in Deepak's eyes, the quiet finality of his posture, always stirred a flicker of recognition for the fragility of life. What struck him, even then, amidst the initial chaos, was the lack of struggle. There were no overturned boxes, no signs of a violent tussle. It suggested either a surprise attack or, more disturbingly, an acquaintance. Deepak's background check yielded a fairly unremarkable life. A stable job, a small family consisting of his wife, Riya, and their 2 young children, a modest home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. No known enemies, no significant debts, no involvement in any illicit activities that the initial sweep could uncover. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary man leading an ordinary life, which made his brutal end all the more perplexing. Why would someone target him with such lethal precision, and in such a desolate location? The first crucial step was to inform the family, a task Sharma always dreaded. It was a duty that never dulled, the sight of shattered lives a constant reminder of the darkness he confronted. Riya Mehra, Deepak's wife, received the news with a gut-wrenching wail that echoed through their small living room. Her shock was palpable, her grief raw and unrestrained. She described Deepak as a loving husband, a devoted father, a man who never caused trouble. Their marriage, she insisted through her sobs, was happy, devoid of any significant conflicts. She recounted his last known movements. He had left for work that morning, as usual, promising to be home for dinner. When he didn't return by midnight, she had begun to worry, but dismissed it as a late meeting or a flat tire, a common enough occurrence. She had not yet filed a missing person report, a delay that was understandable given the circumstances. As the days bled into a week, the investigation hit an early wall. No witnesses had come forward from the industrial area, a ghost town after dark. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was either non-existent or showed nothing pertinent. Deepak's phone records and bank statements revealed no suspicious contacts or transactions. It was as if he had simply vanished from his normal routine, only to reappear as a victim in a forgotten corner of the city. The initial forensic report confirmed the knife as the murder weapon, a common kitchen knife, likely brought to the scene, not found there. No weapon, no clear motive, no obvious suspects. The case was quickly spiraling into a cold trail. Then, a break, albeit a bizarre one, emerged from the city's extensive network of CCTV cameras. A camera positioned at a traffic intersection, several kilometers from the warehouse, captured a grainy image of Deepak's car, a modest sedan, driving erratically around 11 p.m. on the night of the murder. More importantly, it showed a woman in the passenger seat. Her face was obscured by the low resolution and the angle, but her presence was undeniable. This was the first concrete piece of evidence that suggested Deepak was not alone in his final hours, and it introduced a new, crucial element: a mysterious companion. The team meticulously tracked the car's movements, piecing together a mosaic of its journey across the city. The trail eventually led them to a dilapidated motel on the outskirts, a place known more for transient stays than for long-term comfort. The motel's manager, a sleepy-eyed man named Baldev, initially claimed to remember nothing, but a little persistence, and the sight of Inspector Sharma's unyielding gaze, jogged his memory. He recalled a couple checking into room 7 that night, a man fitting Deepak's description and a woman whose face he couldn't quite recall, only that she had a distinctive, brightly colored scarf wrapped around her hair. They had checked out abruptly in the early hours of the morning. Armed with this information, the police searched room 7. What they found, or rather what they didn't find, was telling. No blood, no signs of struggle, but a faint scent of cheap perfume and, critically, a single long strand of dark hair caught in the bedsheets. It was a DNA goldmine, a silent witness to the woman's presence. The DNA sample was sent to the lab for analysis, a process that would take precious days, perhaps even weeks. In the meantime, the image of the woman in the car, however blurry, became the focus of the investigation. Her brightly colored scarf was a small but potentially distinctive detail. Days later, the DNA results came back, a bombshell that sent a jolt through the police station. The hair sample matched a woman named Suman, a local college student with no prior criminal record, no apparent connection to Deepak, and a surprisingly clean digital footprint. Her address was a small, unassuming apartment in a bustling residential complex, a stark contrast to the desolate warehouse or the transient motel. The team moved quickly, armed with a search warrant and a growing sense of anticipation. When they found Suman, she was alone in her apartment, engrossed in a textbook. She was young, perhaps 20, with striking features and, indeed, a collection of brightly colored scarves draped over a chair. Her initial reaction to the police presence was one of bewilderment, then growing fear. She denied knowing anyone named Deepak Mehra, denied ever being in the industrial area, and certainly denied any involvement in a murder. Her denial was firm, almost practiced, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her DNA was in the motel room, she was seen in Deepak's car, and she owned scarves matching the description. Inspector Sharma, an old hand at discerning truth from lies, sat across from her in the interrogation room. The room, designed to be sterile and unyielding, seemed to amplify the tension. Suman maintained her innocence, her voice trembling but her eyes defiant. When confronted with the DNA evidence, the CCTV footage, and the motel manager's testimony, her composure finally began to crack. She admitted, tearfully, that she had been with Deepak that night, but insisted it was a one-time encounter, a brief, misguided liaison. She claimed she met him at a bar, that he was charming and attentive, and that she had willingly gone with him to the motel. Her story became more elaborate. She said they had left the motel in the early hours, and that Deepak had dropped her near her apartment. She then claimed she had walked home alone, unaware of anything amiss. Her account of the time frame, however, did not align with the car's movements towards the industrial area. Sharma pressed her, calmly but relentlessly, poking holes in her narrative. Why did she omit the car's route? Why was her presence at the motel initially denied? Her answers became evasive, her gaze flickering. She clung to her story, modifying details, trying to plug the logical gaps. But the inconsistencies mounted. Finally, under the relentless pressure, Suman broke. But what she said next didn't just confess to her presence. It plunged the entire investigation into a maelstrom of confusion. "I was there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I didn't kill him. He was already dead when I found him." The statement hung in the air, a chilling non sequitur that bewildered even seasoned officers. Already dead? How could he be dead if she was with him in the car and then at the motel? The timeline she now presented was a chaotic jumble of half-truths and apparent delusion. She began to recount a new version of events, one that painted a vastly different picture. She claimed that after leaving the bar with Deepak, they drove to the warehouse, not the motel. She stated that Deepak had told her he had to meet someone there briefly, a business associate. Suman claimed she waited in the car for a while, growing increasingly impatient. Eventually, she went inside to find him and discovered him lying on the floor, already bleeding, already gone. Panic, she explained, had seized her. She fled the scene in his car, driving erratically, eventually abandoning the vehicle in a distant neighborhood before taking a taxi home. She never went to the motel, she insisted now. The motel was a lie she fabricated out of fear. This new narrative created more questions than answers. If Deepak was already dead at the warehouse, how did his car end up at a motel with her? Why did the motel manager identify them as a couple checking in? Why was her DNA in room 7? Suman, however, stuck to this revised story with a newfound, almost desperate conviction. She claimed she didn't know how her DNA got into the motel room, or why the manager would lie. She offered no explanation for the discrepancies, merely reiterated her core assertion. She found him dead. Her insistence, despite the mounting evidence against it, was unnerving. Inspector Sharma ordered a thorough review of all evidence, cross-referencing her latest statement against every detail. The CCTV footage of Deepak's car driving towards the motel and then away from it, still with 2 occupants, directly contradicted her claim of going straight to the warehouse and abandoning the car. The motel manager's clear identification of a couple, matching their descriptions, was another damning piece of evidence. Yet, Suman's conviction was unsettling. Was she genuinely confused, suffering from some form of psychological break? Or was this an elaborate, masterful deception? The psychological profile of Suman began to emerge. A bright student but reportedly withdrawn, with a history of minor social anxieties. She had no known violent tendencies, no history of substance abuse. Her family described her as quiet, perhaps a little naive, but never deceptive. This made her current behavior all the more perplexing. Could she be protecting someone? Or was there a deeper, more sinister layer to this mystery that the police were failing to grasp? The possibility of a third party, a phantom figure, began to loom over the investigation. Sharma decided to revisit the motel, hoping to find some nuance in Baldev's memory. The manager, however, remained steadfast. He distinctly remembered the couple, their faces, the registration process, and the brief interaction. He had no reason to lie, and his testimony was consistent. This left Suman's claim of not being at the motel entirely unsupported by objective evidence. Her story was falling apart under the weight of reality. Yet her insistence on finding Deepak already dead was profoundly disturbing. It suggested a different sequence of events, or perhaps, a desperate attempt to distance herself from the true chronology of the murder. Forensics revisited the warehouse with a new lens. If Suman was telling the truth about finding Deepak dead, then the time of death became paramount. The initial estimate, based on rigor mortis and body temperature, placed the time of death between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. This window was broad enough to encompass both Suman's initial fabricated motel story and her later claim of finding him dead. The absence of a struggle still loomed large. If someone else killed Deepak, how did they subdue him so effectively? And why bring him to such a desolate location, only to leave the body for a passerby to discover? Sharma decided on a risky strategy: a polygraph test for Suman. While not admissible in court, it could provide crucial investigative leads. Suman surprisingly agreed. The results were inconclusive, a mix of deception and truth indicators that seemed to reflect her own internal confusion. When questioned about the specific act of stabbing Deepak, the machine registered significant physiological responses, indicating deception. Yet, when asked if she found him already dead, there was also a notable reaction. It was as if her mind was fractured, holding 2 contradictory realities simultaneously. The polygraph examiner, a seasoned professional, admitted he rarely saw such a confounding result. It wasn't a clear-cut lie, nor was it a clear-cut truth. It was a muddled landscape of psychological distress. This led the investigative team to consider a more complex scenario. What if Suman was present during the murder, but not the perpetrator? What if she witnessed it, and her trauma-induced confusion was manifesting as these conflicting statements? Or, more darkly, what if she was an accomplice trying to obscure her role? The narrative she wove, finding him dead, shifted the blame, but her inability to maintain a consistent story made it suspect. The most critical missing piece was still the motive. Why Deepak? What connection could he have had to Suman, beyond a fleeting, illicit encounter that would lead to such a violent end? Digging deeper into Deepak's life, beyond the initial superficial checks, the team discovered a hidden facet. A colleague, hesitant at first, mentioned that Deepak had been under immense pressure at work. Not just the usual corporate stress, but something more specific. A major contract tender, involving a considerable sum, was in jeopardy. Deepak was responsible for its smooth execution. Whispers of internal sabotage and industrial espionage had circulated within the company. This was a new and potentially explosive lead. Could Deepak's death be linked to his professional life? Was the murder a hit, designed to eliminate him from the contract race, or to silence him? If so, where did Suman fit into this intricate web? Was she a pawn, an unwitting participant, or an active conspirator? The idea that she was a hired hand, a honey trap, was briefly considered, but her overall demeanor, her lack of prior criminal connections, and her genuine distress seemed to argue against it. Her confusion felt authentic, even if her statements were contradictory. Sharma decided to re-interview Riya Mehra, Deepak's wife, this time focusing on his work life, his colleagues, and any recent anxieties he might have expressed. Riya, still reeling from grief, corroborated the colleague's account. Deepak had indeed been under extreme stress, often working late, sometimes returning home agitated and withdrawn. He had mentioned a rival company, Phoenix Textiles, that was aggressively vying for the same lucrative contract. He had even expressed concerns about a mole within his own company, leaking sensitive information. This revelation opened a whole new avenue. The focus shifted from a crime of passion to one of corporate espionage, possibly leading to murder. Sharma dispatched a team to investigate Phoenix Textiles, looking for any connections, any employees with a history of shady dealings, or any direct links to Deepak. Simultaneously, the internal affairs of Deepak's own company, Reliance Mills, were scrutinized, particularly individuals who might have access to the tender information and a motive to betray him. During this expanded investigation, a new name surfaced. Vikas, a former employee of Reliance Mills, now working for Phoenix Textiles. Vikas had been laid off from Reliance Mills under contentious circumstances, suspected of intellectual property theft, though nothing was ever formally proven. He had harbored a deep resentment towards Deepak, whom he blamed for his dismissal. Vikas had the technical knowledge, the access, and the motive. He was a perfect fit for a corporate saboteur, but could he be a murderer? Vikas was brought in for questioning. He was slick, confident, and initially cooperative. He admitted to knowing Deepak, to harboring ill feelings, but vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. He claimed he had an alibi for the night of the murder, attending a family function several hours away. His alibi, however, turned out to be flimsy, based on the word of relatives who could easily be protecting him. He also admitted to being in contact with Deepak in the weeks leading up to the murder, trying to bury the hatchet. As he put it, though the nature of their conversations remained vague. The intersection of Suman's confused statements and Vikas's suspicious behavior created a new hypothesis. What if Vikas was the third party Suman alluded to? What if he was the business associate Deepak was meeting at the warehouse? And what if Suman had witnessed something, a confrontation that led to murder, and her trauma response was to invent these conflicting realities to protect herself, or perhaps out of genuine disassociation? Sharma decided to bring Suman in for another round of questioning, this time armed with the new information about Vikas. He laid out the possibility of a third party, suggesting that she might have been a witness, not a perpetrator. This approach was different. It offered her a potential escape from culpability, providing a framework for her confusing narrative. He explained the concept of trauma-induced memory gaps and confabulation, hoping to gently guide her towards a clearer recollection. Suman listened intently, her eyes wide. A flicker of recognition crossed her face when Vikas's name was mentioned. She paused, took a deep breath, and then, slowly, haltingly, began to speak. Her voice was softer this time, less defensive, more vulnerable. She admitted that Deepak had indeed met someone at the warehouse, a man she didn't know well but recognized from a casual introduction. She remembered his name was Vikas. She recounted waiting in the car, growing anxious. When she went inside, she found Deepak and Vikas arguing heatedly. She described a sudden, violent shove, a glint of metal, and then Deepak falling. She claimed Vikas had pulled out a knife during the altercation. The details were still hazy, fragmented by fear, but a coherent, terrifying picture was beginning to form. She described her horror, her paralysis. Vikas, she claimed, had then turned to her, his face contorted with rage, and threatened her to keep silent, or her family would suffer. He had then forced her into Deepak's car, driven her to the motel, and left her there, planting her DNA, before returning to the warehouse to stage the scene. This was the missing link. The motel manager's testimony, Suman's DNA, the erratic driving, all were explained. Vikas had used her not just as a witness to silence, but as a potential scapegoat. He had manipulated the scene, leaving her fingerprints on the wheel, her DNA in the room, making it appear as though she was intimately involved. His plan was to frame her, or at least to complicate the investigation enough to buy himself time. Suman's conflicting statements, her initial denials, and her later confused accounts were a direct consequence of the trauma, the threats, and the fear of Vikas. She was not just a witness. She was a victim herself, caught in the crossfire. Armed with Suman's new, detailed testimony, and bolstered by the psychological insights, Sharma had a clearer path. Vikas was re-interviewed, this time confronted with Suman's statement and the growing body of circumstantial evidence. His earlier confidence began to crumble. The specific details Suman provided, details only an eyewitness could know, were too precise to refute. The pressure mounted. Vikas, caught in a tightening net, eventually confessed. His motive was indeed corporate. His motive was indeed corporate espionage, fueled by a searing cocktail of professional resentment and financial greed. Vikas admitted that he had been systematically leaking sensitive information from Reliance Mills to Phoenix Textiles for months, undermining Deepak's crucial contract bid. Deepak, suspecting a mole, had been closing in on him. On the night of the murder, Deepak had arranged a clandestine meeting with Vikas at the desolate warehouse, convinced he had evidence of Vikas's betrayal. The confrontation had quickly escalated. Deepak, usually mild-mannered, had been furious, waving printouts of incriminating emails and financial transfers, demanding answers. Vikas, cornered and desperate, saw his entire future crumbling. He knew that if Deepak exposed him, his career would be over, his reputation ruined, and his family would face severe financial hardship. In a moment of uncontrolled rage, fueled by fear and the crushing weight of his impending exposure, Vikas had lashed out. He had brought a knife, ostensibly for self-defense if the meeting turned ugly, and in the heat of the moment, he plunged it into Deepak's chest. The speed and precision of the attack, as the initial forensics report noted, came from a place of cold intent, honed by a sudden, terrifying decision. Suman's presence, Vikas confessed, had been an unforeseen complication. She was indeed waiting in Deepak's car, as Deepak had casually mentioned he was giving a ride to a friend after their meeting. When Suman entered the warehouse, she walked in just as Vikas delivered the fatal blow. Her scream had startled him, bringing him back to the horrific reality of what he had done. Panic seized him. He couldn't afford another witness. His mind, racing, concocted a desperate plan. He had grabbed Suman, silencing her terror with a menacing threat against her family. Then, forcing her into Deepak's car, he drove them both to the motel. His intention was to create a false trail to implicate Suman in a fabricated crime of passion. He checked them in, ensuring his face was obscured while Suman's was partially visible, left her DNA, and made sure the motel manager would remember a couple. He then abandoned Suman at the motel, instructing her to stay put and remain silent, before returning to the warehouse. Back at the crime scene, Vikas meticulously wiped down anything he might have touched, removed Deepak's phone to delay discovery, and ensured the warehouse appeared undisturbed, devoid of a struggle. He then drove Deepak's car away from the motel, towards a distant, quiet neighborhood, where he abandoned it, just as Suman had later described. His calculated actions were designed to confuse, to divert suspicion, and to point the finger squarely at the terrified young woman. Suman's fractured testimony, her shifting stories, and her deep-seated fear were all pieces of Vikas's chillingly elaborate scheme. She was not an accomplice, but an unwilling, traumatized pawn in a deadly game of corporate betrayal. With Vikas's full confession, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. The narrative, once chaotic and contradictory, now flowed with a horrifying logic. Suman's fractured statements were not signs of deception, but symptoms of profound psychological trauma. The polygraph results, previously confounding, now made sense. She was indeed present at the murder, truthful element of finding him dead, but she didn't commit the act, deception regarding her active participation. She was a witness, terrorized into silence and manipulated into becoming a suspect. Inspector Sharma felt a profound sense of grim satisfaction. Another case closed, another wrong righted. But a lingering unease remained. The ease with which an ordinary man could resort to such violence, the cold calculation of Vikas's attempts to frame an innocent girl, spoke volumes about the darker currents beneath the surface of society. He looked at Suman, now calmer, recounting the terrifying events with a clarity that only came with the lifting of immense burden. Her eyes, though still haunted, held a flicker of something new, relief, and perhaps, the first tentative steps towards healing. The labyrinthine dance between truth and deception, in this instance, had ultimately led them to the truth, but not without leaving its scars. The legal proceedings against Vikas were swift and decisive. His detailed confession, coupled with Suman's corroborating testimony, the forensic evidence, and the digital trail of corporate espionage, painted an undeniable picture of premeditated murder. The prosecution built a formidable case, presenting the cold, calculated motive of professional greed and the callous attempt to frame an innocent bystander. Vikas's lawyers attempted to argue for a crime of passion, an impulse act, but the systematic planning, the threats against Suman, and the meticulous staging of the motel scene undermined any such claims. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, a verdict that brought a measure of closure to Deepak's grieving family and a chance for Suman to finally begin processing her trauma. For Suman, the aftermath was a long and arduous journey. The psychological impact of witnessing such a horrific act, coupled with the terror of being implicated and threatened, left deep scars. She withdrew from college for a semester, seeking intensive therapy to cope with the PTSD and anxiety that now plagued her. Inspector Sharma kept in touch, not as an investigator, but as a silent guardian, ensuring she received the support she needed. He understood that while the case was closed for the police, Suman's personal battle was far from over. Her brightly colored scarves, once a vibrant expression of her personality, were now seen by her through a filter of fear, remnants of a nightmarish encounter. It would take time, patience, and professional help for her to reclaim her sense of self, to shed the shadow of Vikas's malice. Meanwhile, the investigation into corporate malfeasance at Reliance Mills and Phoenix Textiles continued, separate from the murder inquiry but intertwined with its origins. The leaks Vikas facilitated had caused significant financial damage and ethical breaches. Several high-ranking individuals at Phoenix Textiles were implicated in the industrial espionage, and internal investigations at Reliance Mills unearthed systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed Vikas to operate undetected for so long. The ripple effect of Deepak Mehra's murder extended far beyond the desolate warehouse, exposing a web of corporate corruption that had festered in the shadows. The contract, the initial catalyst for the tragedy, was ultimately awarded to a different firm, a small consolation amidst the ruins of lives and reputations. Inspector Sharma, back at his desk, reviewed the final reports. The case of Deepak Mehra, while closed, lingered in his mind. It was a stark reminder of how easily the seemingly ordinary can descend into the extraordinarily violent. He reflected on the initial days of the investigation, the frustrating dead ends, the bizarre inconsistencies in Suman's story. The labyrinthine dance between truth and deception was indeed a complex one, often requiring not just forensic skill and logical deduction, but also an intuitive understanding of human psychology, of fear, and of the hidden motives that drive individuals to unthinkable acts. The case also underscored the critical importance of a holistic approach to investigation, moving beyond initial assumptions. Had they dismissed Suman as a mere liar, had they not pressed her with a nuanced understanding of trauma, the true perpetrator might have walked free, and Suman might have been wrongly condemned. It reinforced Sharma's belief that every piece of evidence, every conflicting statement, held a fragment of truth, waiting to be painstakingly unearthed and pieced together. Months later, life slowly began to resume its semblance of normalcy. The warehouse where Deepak's life ended was eventually demolished, making way for a new development project, erasing the grim landmark. Deepak's family, though forever scarred, found solace in the justice served and in the memory of a loving father and husband. Riya, with immense courage, started a foundation in Deepak's name, advocating for ethical business practices and offering support to victims of corporate fraud. She ensured her children remembered their father not for the brutal manner of his death, but for the integrity with which he lived. Suman, slowly, painfully, found her footing again. She returned to college cautiously at first, but with a renewed determination. The vibrant scarves reappeared, sometimes wrapped around her hair, sometimes draped over her shoulders, but now they carried a different significance. They were no longer just accessories. They were symbols of resilience, of a spirit that refused to be broken. She became an advocate for victims of psychological manipulation and trauma, using her own experiences to help others navigate the complex aftermath of similar events. Her voice, once trembling in fear, found strength in advocacy. She understood that while the world could be dark, there was also an inherent responsibility to shed light on its hidden corners, to seek justice, and to foster healing. Inspector Sharma continued his work, walking the well-trodden paths of justice, confronting the shadows that lurked in the city's underbelly. The Mehra case served as a constant, quiet echo in his mind, a reminder that every crime, no matter how perplexing, had a story waiting to be told, and a truth waiting to be unveiled. And sometimes, the truth lay hidden not in plain sight, but in the deepest, most fear-ridden recesses of a traumatized mind, slowly, painstakingly revealed, one fragile piece at a time. The pursuit of justice, he knew, was not just about catching criminals. It was about giving a voice to the victims, and about ensuring that even in the face of profound darkness, the light of truth would ultimately prevail. The chilling statistic that 70 of murder confessions are later recanted still resonated with Sharma. But now it wasn't just a number. It was a complex human tapestry. It was Suman's initial denial born of terror, her fragmented stories born of trauma, and the painstaking process required to sift through the layers of fear and deception to find the singular, inexplicable statement that held the key. It was a testament to the fact that truth, often elusive, sometimes demands not just scrutiny, but also empathy and a deep understanding of the human condition, especially when fear and manipulation cast their long, insidious shadows over an innocent soul. The case of Deepak Mehra was a stark education, etched permanently into the annals of the city's criminal history, a story of corporate greed, fatal rage, and the profound resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. The chilling statistic that 70 of murder confessions are later recanted, still resonated with Sharma. But now it wasn't just a number. It was a complex human tapestry. It was Suman's initial denial born of terror, her fragmented stories born of trauma, and the painstaking process required to sift through the layers of fear and deception to find the singular, inexplicable statement that held the key. It was a testament to the fact that truth, often elusive, sometimes demands not just scrutiny, but also empathy and a deep understanding of the human condition, especially when fear and manipulation cast their long, insidious shadows over an innocent soul. The case of Deepak Mehra was a stark education, etched permanently into the annals of the city's criminal history, a story of corporate greed, fatal rage, and the profound resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. This profound education, however, was not the last Sharma would receive from the shadowy dance of truth and lies. Just a year after the Mehra case closed, the city was plunged into another mystery, one that would test his understanding of human psychology even further, forcing him to confront a confession that was both immediate and, paradoxically, utterly unbelievable. It began on a sweltering August afternoon, the kind where the air hung heavy and the sun beat down with relentless ferocity, baking the asphalt and wilting every green leaf. The call came in at 2:37 p.m. A body discovered in a high-rise residential complex, a luxury apartment on the 18th floor, overlooking the bustling metropolis. Unlike the desolate warehouse, this was a scene of opulence, a gilded cage for a violent end. Constable Anya Sharma, no relation to the inspector, but a rising star in her own right, was the first officer on the scene. She was meticulous, sharp-eyed, and relatively new to the homicide division, having recently transferred from fraud investigations. The apartment belonged to Arjun Singh, a renowned architect, famous for his minimalist designs and a reputation for being a reclusive genius. His body was found in his lavish study, slumped over a desk piled with blueprints and design sketches. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, delivered with an object that was conspicuously absent from the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransacking, suggesting the victim knew his attacker or had let them in willingly. When Inspector Sharma arrived, the apartment was already a hive of activity, forensics meticulously working their way through the pristine, almost clinical space. The stark modernity of the decor, all clean lines and muted tones, seemed to heighten the brutality of the scene. Arjun Singh, in his mid-50s, was known for his precise habits, his meticulous nature. This crime, in its sudden violence, felt entirely at odds with the controlled environment he had curated. What immediately struck Sharma was not the absence of a weapon, but the sheer, unsettling calm that permeated the apartment, despite the violent death. There was no spilled coffee, no overturned chair, no sign of a struggle whatsoever. It was as if death had arrived silently, efficiently, and without resistance. Arjun Singh's expensive spectacles lay unbroken on the floor, mere inches from his outstretched hand. The implications were chilling. Either the attack was entirely unexpected, or the victim had been incapacitated before the fatal blow. The initial investigation into Arjun Singh's background yielded a curious profile. He was incredibly wealthy, immensely talented, but notoriously private. He lived alone, had no immediate family, and his social circle was confined to a handful of professional associates and a long-time personal assistant. No known enemies, no illicit dealings, no obvious romantic entanglements. He was, by all accounts, a man dedicated entirely to his craft, his life an open book of architectural brilliance, and a closed vault of personal affairs. Just hours after the discovery, a call came into the station. It was from a man named Rohan Prasad, Arjun Singh's personal assistant for the last 15 years. His voice was trembling, barely coherent. I killed him," he choked out, the words laced with a strange mix of terror and resolute finality. "I killed Arjun Singh." This was unprecedented. A confession, unprompted and immediate, from the one person who had consistent access to the victim and the apartment. Rohan Prasad was brought in, his demeanor a stark contrast to the initial phone call. He was a small, unassuming man, meticulously dressed, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose. He seemed utterly overwhelmed, his eyes wide and vacant, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. In the interrogation room, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Rohan repeated his confession, calmly and without hesitation. I killed Arjun. I struck him with a heavy bronze statue from his desk. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. He claimed a heated argument had erupted between them over a crucial design flaw in a new project, a flaw that Arjun refused to acknowledge. In a fit of rage, Rohan admitted he had lashed out, grabbing the nearest heavy object and striking Arjun. He then fled the apartment in a panic, disposing of the weapon, a bronze statue of a geometric design, in a public dumpster several blocks away. The confession was damning. It accounted for the weapon, the lack of struggle, and Rohan's immediate panic. It was a narrative that, on the surface, seemed to fit all the pieces. Inspector Sharma, however, felt a familiar prickle of unease. He had seen too many perfect confessions unravel. Rohan's composure, despite the gravity of his admission, felt strangely detached. His eyes, though wide, lacked the profound despair or raw remorse Sharma had come to recognize in genuine perpetrators. It was almost as if he was reciting a script. Anya Sharma, the new constable, was assigned to cross-reference Rohan's statement with the forensic findings. The crime scene analysis confirmed the blunt force trauma, consistent with a heavy, dense object. The description of the bronze statue, a specific, recognizable piece from Arjun's study, was verifiable. Rohan's movements, traced through CCTV footage from the building and surrounding streets, showed him leaving the apartment complex at the estimated time of death, carrying a heavy object concealed in a briefcase, and later stopping near a public dumpster. All the objective evidence seemed to corroborate his confession. Yet, Sharma couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally off. He looked at Rohan, sitting meekly in the interrogation room, his story consistent, his alibi non-existent. Why was this man, a long-time loyal assistant, suddenly confessing to murder? The heated argument over a design flaw felt almost too mundane, too sterile for such a violent outburst. And the bronze statue, Arjun Singh was known for his collection of such pieces, each one meticulously placed, almost revered. For Rohan to use one in a fit of rage, and then dispose of it so casually, felt discordant with his otherwise deferential and meticulous nature. Sharma decided to revisit Rohan's psychological profile. His colleagues described him as exceptionally dedicated, almost subservient to Arjun Singh. He was the quiet force behind Arjun's brilliance, handling all logistical and administrative complexities. Rohan had no history of violence, no anger management issues, no personal life beyond his devotion to Arjun. He lived a modest life, far removed from the architect's lavish world. The sudden, explosive rage he described felt like a narrative imposed on him, rather than an organic expression of his character. Rohan, Sharma began, his voice calm, leaning forward across the table. Tell me about Arjun Singh. What kind of man was he, truly? Rohan paused, his eyes glazing over slightly, as if recalling a distant memory. He was a genius, Inspector. A visionary. Demanding, yes, often difficult, but brilliant. He pushed boundaries. He was my life, you understand? Everything I did for him. The devotion in his voice was undeniable. Even now, this profound loyalty, Sharma realized, was the key. It didn't sound like the sentiment of a man who would murder his mentor over a design flaw. Sharma then probed Rohan's version of the argument. You said you argued over a design flaw. Can you elaborate? What specifically was the flaw? Why was it so contentious? Rohan's answers became vague, less precise. He fumbled for technical terms, his explanation of the supposed flaw generic and unconvincing. This was a man who handled all of Arjun's complex architectural briefs, who lived and breathed these designs. His inability to articulate the supposed central point of contention felt like a significant crack in his otherwise solid confession. A meticulous man, a precise assistant, would surely remember the exact details of the argument that led him to murder. While Sharma continued his subtle psychological pressure, Constable Anya was pursuing her own leads, focusing on the meticulous details of Rohan's disposal of the weapon. She had retrieved the bronze statue from the dumpster, carefully bagged and tagged. During forensic analysis, a crucial detail emerged: faint, almost imperceptible fingerprints. Not Rohan's. Anya brought this new development to Sharma. The fingerprints on the weapon, barely visible beneath a layer of dust and grime, were too degraded for immediate identification, but they were definitely not a match for Rohan Prasad. This was the first concrete piece of evidence that directly contradicted Rohan's confession. If he had used the statue, his fingerprints, even smudged, would be present. The absence suggested someone else had wielded it. Sharma presented this to Rohan. "Rohan, the fingerprints on the statue are not yours. Explain." For the first time, Rohan's unwavering composure faltered. His eyes flickered, his breath hitched. He stared at the table, then slowly, agonizingly, looked up at Sharma. I don't understand, Inspector. I swear I used it." His voice was softer now, tinged with genuine confusion. The practiced recitation was breaking down. This was the moment Sharma had been waiting for. He knew Rohan was confessing, but he didn't believe he was the killer. The psychological profile, the incongruity of the motive, and now the forensic evidence, it all pointed to a deeper, more complicated truth. "Rohan," Sharma said gently, "I believe you are protecting someone. Who are you covering for? Why are you taking the blame for this?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Rohan's face crumpled. Tears welled in his eyes, silent rivulets tracing paths down his cheeks. The stoic facade shattered, revealing the terror beneath. "He was all I had, Inspector," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My life revolved around him. And now he's gone." He finally admitted it. He hadn't killed Arjun. He had found Arjun dead. Rohan's revised story was chilling. He had arrived at Arjun's apartment that morning, as usual, to prepare for a day of meetings. He found the door ajar, which was unusual for the security-conscious architect. Entering, he called out, but received no reply. He found Arjun in his study, slumped over the desk, already lifeless. The bronze statue, the murder weapon, was on the floor beside the body. Panic, absolute and consuming, had seized him. He didn't call the police. His mind, loyal to Arjun even in death, immediately leaped to a desperate conclusion. Arjun Singh, the visionary, the genius, must be protected from scandal, from the ignominy of a violent death that might overshadow his legacy. Or perhaps Rohan feared he would be blamed. In his state of shock and grief, a twisted logic took hold. He believed if he confessed, if he took the blame, he could control the narrative, protect Arjun's memory from further scrutiny, and perhaps ensure Arjun's reputation remained unsullied. He grabbed the statue, wiped it instinctively, and fled, determined to dispose of the evidence and then confess, hoping to create a clean, singular story. He had seen too many high-profile cases dragged through the mud, their victims' lives dissected and tarnished. This explanation, while born of a deeply misguided loyalty, resonated with Rohan's known character. It explained his immediate confession, his unwavering story, and the absence of his fingerprints. It also explained the bizarre, almost robotic way he had recounted the murder, as if reciting a pre-prepared statement. He wasn't remembering the act of killing. He was remembering the act of confessing. "So, if it wasn't you, Rohan," Sharma pressed, "who was it? Who else had access to Arjun Singh's apartment? Who else would want him dead?" Rohan struggled, his memory fragmented by trauma and his own subsequent actions. He remembered a faint scent of a distinctive perfume in the apartment, something floral and unique. He also recalled hearing a faint argument from inside the study as he approached the apartment door, before he entered and found the body. A woman's voice. This new lead, though vague, was crucial. A woman. A distinctive perfume. And the mysterious fingerprints on the statue. The forensic team, revisiting the crime scene, found traces of the perfume, faint but identifiable, leading them to a specific, high-end fragrance. Simultaneously, the degraded fingerprints from the statue were sent for advanced analysis, hoping to reconstruct enough detail for identification. The investigation now shifted focus to the women in Arjun Singh's life. His personal assistant, Rohan, had meticulously kept records of every professional and social interaction. Among them, a name surfaced repeatedly in recent weeks. Dr. Meera Anand, a renowned art historian and curator, with whom Arjun had been collaborating on a highly secretive project involving ancient architectural artifacts. Their meetings had become frequent, intense, and unusually private. When Dr. Meera Anand was approached, she was initially cooperative, confirming her professional relationship with Arjun. She was elegant, intellectually sharp, and exuded an air of refined confidence. She admitted to having met Arjun the day of his death, but insisted she left his apartment hours before the estimated time of death, around noon, to attend a university lecture. She denied any arguments or discord. However, her demeanor subtly changed when questioned about her perfume. She wore the exact high-end fragrance detected at the crime scene. And when asked if she had seen anyone else at the apartment, or if she had any knowledge of the bronze statue, a flicker of something, fear or recognition, crossed her face. Sharma decided to pursue her alibi. The university confirmed Dr. Anand had been scheduled to give a lecture that afternoon, but the attendance records showed she arrived late, well after the time she claimed to have left Arjun's apartment. The gap in her alibi was precisely when Arjun Singh was estimated to have been murdered. Confronted with this, Meera Anand's composure began to fray. She admitted she had an affair with Arjun, a clandestine relationship that had grown intense in recent months. They had met that morning, as she claimed, but their discussion had spiraled into a heated argument. Arjun, a man of rigid control, had decided to end their affair, fearing it would jeopardize his reputation and his secretive project. But there was another, deeper reason. Arjun had discovered Meera was subtly manipulating the architectural artifact project for her own personal gain, planning to embezzle funds through inflated valuations. The argument had escalated, not over a design flaw, but over betrayal and deceit. Meera, enraged and cornered, saw her meticulously planned scheme collapsing around her. In a moment of uncontrolled fury, she had grabbed the bronze statue from Arjun's desk, an object he treasured, and struck him repeatedly. The attack was swift, brutal, and unexpected, leaving Arjun no time to react. The lack of struggle was because he was taken completely by surprise, struck down by a woman he had trusted, then betrayed. After the murder, Meera had panicked. She wiped the statue, trying to remove any traces, but in her haste, missed some faint prints. She fled the apartment, hoping to blend into the city's anonymity, and fabricated the alibi, banking on her academic schedule to provide cover. The pieces clicked. The faint perfume, the arguments Rohan vaguely overheard, the specific bronze statue, the lack of struggle, and now Meera Anand's confession. It all painted a coherent, terrifying picture. The advanced fingerprint analysis confirmed the partial prints from the statue belonged to Dr. Meera Anand, sealing her fate. Rohan Prasad, the loyal assistant, was cleared of all charges, but his ordeal left him deeply shaken. He sought psychological counseling to deal with the trauma of finding Arjun and the immense guilt of his misguided confession. Inspector Sharma ensured he received the support he needed, understanding that some wounds were not visible to the naked eye. Rohan eventually found a new, quieter life, away from the demanding world of architectural genius, slowly learning to live for himself, not just for another. Dr. Meera Anand was arrested and charged with the murder of Arjun Singh. Her trial was a sensation, juxtaposing her image as a brilliant, respected academic against the brutal reality of her crime. The prosecution meticulously laid out the motive: greed, betrayal, and a desperate act to cover up embezzlement. She was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, her career and reputation utterly destroyed. For Inspector Sharma, the case of Arjun Singh was another profound lesson in the nuances of truth and deception. Rohan's false confession, born of loyalty and trauma, was a stark reminder that a confession, however immediate and convincing, was only the beginning of the truth, not its endpoint. It reaffirmed his belief in looking beyond the surface, digging deeper into the psychological motivations, and always cross-referencing against objective forensic evidence. The 70 statistic of recanted confessions now held an even greater weight in his mind. It wasn't just about false accusations or coercive interrogations. It was also about complex human emotions, fear, loyalty, trauma, and even a twisted sense of protection that could drive someone to confess to a crime they didn't commit. The labyrinthine dance, he mused, was never truly over. Each case was a new variation, a new challenge, a new opportunity to learn from the intricate, often heartbreaking, stories that lay hidden beneath the surface of crime. And in every step of that dance, Sharma knew, the most powerful tool was not just a keen eye for detail, but an empathetic understanding of the human heart, in all its darkness and its surprising resilience.